History didn't start today. Let me give you the full picture. On February 28, 2026, during active peace negotiations, the United States and Israel launched a surprise attack on Iran. The supreme leader was killed, the Strait of Hormuz was closed, and the global economy entered its worst energy crisis since 1973. There's a lot of noise around this story. Let me cut through it. In the next 25 minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how we got here, the decisions, the miscalculations, the warnings that were ignored, and, honestly, what I don't know yet. Because anyone who tells you they have all the answers is not giving you analysis, they're giving you a narrative. Let's begin. To understand February 28th, you need to go back to 2018. That's when the United States, under President Trump's first term, unilaterally withdrew from the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal negotiated under the Obama administration. Reasonable people disagree on whether that deal was good or bad.
What is not in dispute is what happened next. Iran's economy was crushed by reimposed sanctions, and their nuclear program accelerated. Fast forward to October 7, 2023. Hamas attacked Israel. Israel went to war in Gaza. And Iran's network of regional proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Hamas in Gaza, began to fracture under sustained Israeli military pressure. Then came June 2025. Israel launched what became known as the 12-Day War, striking Iranian military and nuclear facilities. The United States joined with its own airstrikes. A ceasefire followed. But the pressure didn't stop. In September 2025, the UN reimposed sweeping sanctions on Iran through the snapback mechanism, freezing assets, suspending arms transactions, targeting Iran's ballistic missile program. By December 2025, Iran's currency had collapsed. Treasury Secretary Bessent publicly called that collapse the, quote, grand culmination of the maximum pressure strategy. And then January 2026, the largest protests inside Iran since 1979. Millions of Iranians in the streets, driven by a collapsed economy and decades of grievances. The regime responded with mass killings. Here is what I want you to hold in your mind. Iran was, by almost every measure, at its weakest point in decades. And that is precisely the moment the decision was made to strike. This is where it gets important. Let me identify every major player in this conflict and tell you exactly what each one wants. Because interests explain behavior, and behavior explains events. The United States. The stated objectives were clear. Eliminate Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. Induce regime change. But here's the tension I want you to notice. Regime change happened. Ali Khamenei was killed in the strikes. His son was selected as successor. And Trump has publicly said he distrusts Iran's new leadership. So the objective was achieved, and it created a new problem.
That's not unusual in warfare, but it matters. On the diplomatic side, the U.S. proposal currently on the table would require Iran to ship its entire enriched uranium stockpile to the United States and shut down its underground facilities. Iran has called some of those terms unacceptable. Talks are being mediated by Pakistan. There's no American military victory available here that resolves the Strait of Hormuz crisis. That strait will only reopen through diplomacy. Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu lobbied President Trump for this strike through early 2026. Israeli intelligence was cited as a decisive factor in the decision to launch Operation Epic Fury. Israel's calculus was straightforward. A nuclear-armed Iran is an existential threat. The window to act was open. They acted. But here's what I find genuinely interesting, and I want to be careful to distinguish analysis from opinion here. Israel is now reportedly concerned about U.S. concessions in the peace negotiations.
As of this week, Israel was not fully briefed on where talks stood and was, according to Reuters, preparing for escalation, not a deal. That's an alliance under stress. Not broken, but under stress. Iran. Iran's new leadership is in an extraordinarily difficult position. They inherited a war they didn't start, at least not this phase of it. Their military has been significantly degraded. Their economy was already broken before February 28th, and the Strait of Hormuz closure, Iran's most powerful leverage card, is also strangling their own economy. But here's what the CIA assessment this week tells us. And again, I'm flagging this as coming from anonymous officials. Take the confidence level accordingly. Iran reportedly retains about 75% of its pre-war missile launchers and roughly 70% of its pre-war missile stockpile. If accurate, and I want to be honest, this contradicts earlier U.S. official statements, it tells us Iran planned for this. They built their entire missile program specifically to deter the United States and Israel. The fact that some of their underground facilities survived American bombardment, that was probably not a surprise to the people who designed them. The Gulf Arab states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, these countries wanted stability. They got caught in the crossfire. The war has caused what analysts are calling a systemic collapse of the Gulf Cooperation Council economic model. And something happened last week that I think deserves more attention than it received in mainstream coverage. Saudi Arabia and Kuwait reportedly blocked the U.S. military from using their bases and airspace for Project Freedom, the American operation to reopen the strait. Why? Because they felt the U.S. was not protecting them adequately against Iranian retaliation. Think about that. America's closest Gulf allies said, "Not in our backyard." That's a significant diplomatic signal. China and Russia. Neither country is unhappy with this war's trajectory. Russia benefits directly from oil at $120 a barrel. The higher energy prices go, the more Moscow earns, and the more the global pressure to maintain Ukraine sanctions weakens. China gets roughly a third of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. It is alarmed by the disruption, genuinely. But it also sees an opportunity to position itself as the responsible great power, the mediator, the alternative to American unilateralism. Watch Beijing carefully over the next few weeks. Now here's where I want to slow down. Because the media has been cycling through optimism and alarm every 48 hours for the past 2 months. A deal is imminent. No deal. Escalation. Ceasefire. Back to war. I want to give you something more durable. 3 scenarios, and I'll tell you which one I think is most likely and why. Scenario 1. A deal is reached within weeks. Iran accepts the core terms of the U.S. proposal. Enriched uranium ships to the United States. Underground facilities close under international verification. The strait reopens. The new Iranian leadership uses the deal to stabilize domestically. Oil prices fall. Global markets recover. This is possible. The incentives are real on both sides. Iran cannot sustain this blockade indefinitely. Trump wants a headline victory before domestic political pressure builds. Pakistan is actively mediating and has credibility with both parties. But here's what could derail it. Israel. If Netanyahu believes the deal leaves Iran's nuclear infrastructure intact, even under inspection, he may act unilaterally to prevent it. We've seen this before. It's not a hypothetical. Scenario 2. Negotiations collapse and escalation resumes. Iran rejects the terms. Or a leak kills the deal politically before it can be signed. Trump orders a new wave of strikes. Iran retaliates. And this time, goes after Gulf oil infrastructure at a scale we haven't seen yet. Oil hits $150, possibly $180. The IMF's recession scenario becomes real. The global south, countries that had nothing to do with this conflict, faces food and fuel crises they cannot absorb. I want to be direct. This scenario is not unlikely. We are one bad leak, one miscalculation, one unilateral Israeli strike away from it. Scenario 3. A frozen conflict, the most historically common outcome. Neither full peace nor full war. The strait partially reopens under some framework. Oil stays elevated but below crisis levels. American attention gradually shifts. Iran rebuilds under new leadership, slowly, under heavy sanctions. The nuclear question is deferred, not resolved. In my experience, and I've covered conflicts from the Balkans to Iraq to Afghanistan, this is how most wars end when there's no clear military victory available to either side. Not with a treaty, with exhaustion. The question is how much damage gets done before we get there.
I said I'd tell you which scenario I think is most likely.
Honestly, right now, today, I'd put the probability somewhere between scenarios 1 and 3. A partial deal, a framework agreement. Not a comprehensive resolution, but enough to reopen the strait and give both sides a face-saving exit. I could be wrong. This situation is changing by the hour. But that's my read, and I'll tell you if it changes. Let me give you my honest assessment. Not the headlines, not the spin. Mine. I've been covering conflicts for 35 years. I was in the Balkans when the West said the war would be short. I was in Iraq when we said the same thing. Here is what concerns me most about this war, and it's not Iran's missile stockpile. It's not even the Strait of Hormuz. It's the gap between American military power and American strategic clarity. The United States has unmatched military capability in that region. What I cannot see, and I've been looking hard, is a clear, defined endpoint.
What does success look like the day after a deal is signed? What happens to Iran's nuclear infrastructure under the new leadership? What is the American commitment to the Gulf states that absorbed Iranian strikes on our behalf? Those questions don't have public answers yet, and in my experience, wars that start without clear answers to those questions tend to produce outcomes nobody actually wanted. I hope I'm wrong. I've been wrong before, on the optimistic side, and I will tell you clearly if the evidence changes my assessment. The 2026 Iran war is not another Middle East story. It is a stress test for every system that holds the modern world together. Energy markets, nuclear non-proliferation, American credibility abroad, and the rules of international order that were built after the last World War. How this ends will shape the next decade of geopolitics. If this analysis gave you clarity, share it. Subscribe if you want this level of analysis every day.
Independent voices like this one survive because of your support. This is Conflict Daily Zone. Until next time, think carefully.